All right. Hello, everyone. Got a few more people joining in, getting their audio connected with this Zoom conversation. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of MGM Werx. My name is Joyce Vaughn, the Marketing Events Manager, and also AUIX, and we have Bill DeMarco on as well. Today, we're going to have our Werx Seminar series featuring Toby Redshaw. Toby is the CEO of Versus Advisory, and the conversation will be demystifying the fourth industrial revolution and 5G. I'm super excited to hear about this myself. I got to brief through the slides, so I'm excited to hear the conversation that's going to come around it. If you have questions during this conversation, please put them in the chat. We'll also try to facilitate a little question and answer session at the end. And now I'm going to turn it over to Toby as I pull up the slides.
Thanks. So glad to be here. Got a lot to cover. Hopefully there's some really informative bits in here, some answers to some questions that you might have, and then hopefully it spawns some other questions for later investigation and digging in on your side. There are a couple of pauses throughout the presentation for Q&A. So let's jump straight into it, and let me run you through the storyline on the next slide. So I've been doing tech stuff since I was 14, and this is maybe definitely the most change intensive time, not just tech, but across the spectrum, whether it's business or society or geopolitics or science, that I've ever seen, and it's all coming together at the same time. So I'm going to walk you through that. The anchor of this revolution is purely technological for what they refer to as the fourth industrial revolution. I'm going to walk through what that really means, how that works. I'm going to demystify 5G for you and show you what that really means and where the impacts are. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, so what does that really mean from an imperative point of view? How does that change things? And then unfold that into ecosystems. And then we're going to close with Charles Dickens from a previous industrial revolution. And I'm also going to give a little look back historically. There have been times of change like this where there have been big technology shifts. And there's one little group that stands out that did something differently that I think is informative for today. So we'll cover that. So if we jump on to the next slide, so the conspiracy of change, and then jump to the next. So it's just the beginning of these change waves hitting. A lot of the emerging tech is in alpha or beta stage right now, but it's definitely out of the garage and into the land of real impact, especially 5G, right? You can't open a tech periodical without finding 4 articles full of buzzwords about 5G. In this sort of environment, clarity of mission, clarity of strategy above that will matter even more. And then the matching, and this is where strategy and mission tend to fall apart a bit. Matching your command and control structures to mission will really be essential, especially what people get rewarded for, what they get punished for, so you can manage behaviors, because that is what drives the cultural change. And then what happens a lot when you have strategy to mission change is everybody gets it and says, okay, let's get going. And they miss the last step, which is that matching of talent to task. You know, if the game switches from baseball to rugby, I don't care how good your baseball players are, you got to go get some rugby players, right? And it's a bad metaphor. Some people can move over, but you have to seed the right talent. And I'm a huge fan of a thing called journey talent, which is quite simply, look, if you're going on a new journey, take some people who've done that journey with you before, right? Done it before. Take them with you. So if you jump to the next slide, it's a little bit of a busy slide, but out in the business world, B2B is becoming B2B2C. Everybody is pushing down that chain. Now, why does that matter beyond business? Well, that is a complete evolution of the supply chain processes, making them more interlinked, faster, more data intensive. Also, people that make big things, you know, like locomotives, jet engines, combine harvesters, even beef, are starting starting to make things as a service. That's a little typo. They're supposed to be homemade missiles after beef. You know, take Gaza, for example, where we spend a lot of time trying to stop missile components going there so they can launch them out of there. What if you started doing missiles as a service and said, hey, we're going to ship you some 3D printers and the software to print the components, and then all you do is you print them and you assemble them. You don't need to import components. Well, guess what? Iran's already starting to do that, right? And so that's a whole new environment where things that you thought you had to buy, you can procure as a service. On the cyber side, this is already happening in the dark web and has been for 5 or 6 years, which makes everything worse. Out in the business world, all sales are going to start to include experience, and experience will include AR capabilities and a longitudinal narrative. Now, what does that mean? It means that, look, if I engage Dario, for example, in one situation, I will remember Dario and I will engage him again and again, whether I'm in a support role or an antagonist role, and I will have an intelligent longitudinal narrative against that. If this is happening out in the business world, it certainly can happen inside the military world. You'll start to see digital snackable intelligence and heuristics, not giant downloads of reports that analysts have to pore over, but really procured, timely, pertinent, relevant. Here's what you need to know now. One of the problems with the expansion of technology is you can get overloaded data. If you're trying to look at perimeter defense from a cyber perspective, for example, that is a classic example of how do you sift through millions and millions of bits of data to find the 3 or 4 needles, the 3 or 4 patterns that you really should be able to do. One of the things behind JADC2 is to get to an information environment where you can actually do that intelligently. I'll talk about Fourth Industrial Revolution later. The other thing that is happening is Agile at scale. I'll dig into that down the slide deck a little bit. One of the things that is really new is Agile at scale. That you always used to be big, slow, fight small, fast, right? And we've all seen asymmetric environments and asymmetric warfare, and we know how that works. It's also the same thing in commerce, right? You see small little agile companies start to dig into bigger ones and eventually beat them. And there's a 50-year road of wreckage of big companies that thought, well, those guys will never do anything to me. The really scary one, though, is Agile at scale. And I'll dig into that a little bit. The other thing that this is going to do, and this will make more sense when you see the tech, is silos will get blown up, and you will see networks, first tier, second tier, third tier, and complex supply chains that have real process intelligence, are proactive and preventative and pattern matched, and that will blow across a lot of siloed processes where the process goes up a silo, down a silo, up a silo, and that has huge impacts for traditional command and control, especially if you want to be inside the cycle time of your competitor or your enemy. The history of all technology is the really complicated bits get Legoized over time. I mean, there used to be a time where you had to code your own object request broker, or build your own middleware, or do your own application server. Those things have all turned into Lego inside of tech offerings. That is now found a new gear and is accelerating extremely fast. The low code, no code component of that probably even faster. I'll give you one example. A company you've probably never heard of, UiPath, is the top right-hand corner of the Gartner quadrant in this, and is worth $38 billion, right? So not small beer. 2D is going to turn into 3D. There's so much you can do with 3D environments that you can't do with 2D. I've seen people with about 30 minutes of training be able to manage 9 different digital dimensions, and that means sort of digital sets of reporting easily across 9 dimensions with the right 3D visual space and 3-dimensional sort of monitoring. I've seen that on the cyber side. I've seen it at a couple of other places. You just can't do that in a 2D environment. I'll talk a little bit about IPAE, which is an emerging field. That's immersive participative audience environments or audience engagement. There's In-Q-Tel's a big investor in that right now. The leading company is Walter Parks, who built a little company called DreamWorks. They did Men in Black, The Gladiator, Walter Mitty, Catch Me If You Can, with another guy called Spielberg. That's what they're doing today, right? Those guys could choose to do anything they want. They're building immersive, participative audience engagement environments. We'll talk about 5G and edge computing. I originally went to Verizon to do the 5G strategy for them, built out the first network of 5G labs and ecosystem labs there. So I'm pretty deep on all of that stuff. There's a really interesting real-time cycle time thing that'll be born for the first time out of that. And then just the speed of innovation. It's the fastest time by a factor of 10 to go from I've got an idea and 2 friends and a PowerPoint to get cash and scale up a company. Every scalable bit, including supply chain and fabrication, is now available on demand as well as workforce. The dark web, I think a lot of you know a lot about that. It's probably the most Darwinian advanced IT environment on earth. They don't, you buy a new system at Bragg, or you buy a new system for company XYZ, you can't go back to next year and go upstairs and go, hey, there's a new, better one has been built. Let me go get that, because you've spent the capital, you've made the investment, you're living with that for 4 to 5 to 10 years. That's not the case in the dark web. They steal it. They just use the next greatest thing. So their cycle time for improvement is really something. They've already gone to a low code, no code service model. And then while 5G rolls out and IoT expands, the target space is just becoming bigger and richer. And I think a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, DoD itself, there's a level of focus that has to be put on the health crisis we're going through that detracts from other things. Leadership time is a very finite resource, and if you get this crisis loaded in, there's no extra bucket of time for you to go do that. So not a fair fight. If you Google my last name in the dark web, there's a scary paper from about 5 years ago about what was going to happen in 5 years, and it's happening now. So that ties all that together. So all of this stuff is coming down together. We've never seen an environment like this. So if you jump onto the next slide. So the thing when you look back across history for big shifts in technology, like when the last big network shift was when railroads and telegraph started to cross the country. The really big, and of course Europe and other places, the really big winners are the ones that looked at the model level, that sort of abstracted one layer away from activity and say, okay, what's the model? How would we reinvent the model with this new technology, as opposed to how do we improve our business? How do we improve our structure? How do we make our military a little more effective, because we've now got nail guns instead of hammers, right? So let's look at some of those winners. If we jump onto the next page, we'll blast through these. So that guy on the left in that extremely fancy outfit with that amazing hairdo, that's von Clausewitz. He's the father of modern military strategy, which means he's the grandfather of modern business strategy. You can read his gigantic, thick, written by a German with a long run-on sentences book, but it all really boils down to, look, plan loosely, be really, really well prepared, and then execute, execute, execute. That guy on the right is von Moltke, who was his disciple and ran the Prussian army in the 1860s. He's the guy that said, no plan survives its first contact with the battlefield. So there was this really not super robust gun called a Dreissy needle gun that they took to the Brits in the early 1860s. You know, and this is when there's a musket war going on in America. He said, you know, look, muskets don't break, right? 1 in 100 breaks every year. These things break every 4 or 5 months. The Brits said, we're not using it. They took it to the French. They said, no, we're not using it. He looked at it and he went, wait, this is the first bolt action rifle. This thing can put bullets on targets 6 to 7 times faster than you can with a musket. And oh, by the way, you don't have to stand up when you reload this thing, so you're much smaller target space. Maybe it's a little less accurate to begin with, and I have to carry, you know, every platoon has to carry 1 spare because they break. So think about bullets on target at the same unit cost, 6x. Pretty interesting way to change that model. So he not only adopted this wholeheartedly, he also insisted that they keep calling it the Dreissy needle gun, because nobody wants to buy something called the Dreissy needle gun, right? If they'd have called it the amazing death weapon, probably would have sold like hotcakes, but he didn't want anybody else to get it. The other 2 really big model innovations that he did is he looked at the rail network and the telegraph network and changed the way standing armies were formed in the 1860s to have a much bigger component in the reserve side that you could call up and dump on a train really quickly, and he could position his military differently geographically. Now he had to change the whole training map, the whole command and control structure to do that. But if you know anything about military history, he just wandered all over Europe in the 1860s, kicking the tar out of everybody, right? The one caveat I want to put on this is that little blue thing down at the bottom. Changing your model has to be changing your model effectively. No amount of great planning talent or a technical capability will save you from bad strategy. Kmart's a great example of that. Motorola, after the iPhone came out and phones started to become portable software devices, fantastic execution machine. Just the army lined up for the last war, not the next war. So if you jump to the next slide, and I promise you we'll throw an Air Force person in here in a minute. So that's the father of modern naval strategy. One of the things for me about Admiral Mahan, more than his brilliant naval strategy, was that he was one of the first that said, look, you really can teach command. There's 2 really difficult components to it. One, we were talking about before we started up, is the ethics of leadership and sort of what von Clausewitz called moral fortitude, and having that capability and be able to make those judgments in very short cycle periods. And then the other part is, how do you lead and make decisions with imperfect information inside really compressed time cycles? And one of the things he emphasized in slightly different language is, look, know what the big picture is, going back to some early ancient Greek learning. Always look at things from the big picture and then boil down and understand the ecosystems and the secondary and the tertiary and the quaternary impacts of what you're doing. One of the people in the audience has a bust of Socrates behind their head, and Plato was the guy that said, look, if you see 2 guys arguing, he didn't literally say 30,000 feet, but he said, look, go to 30,000 feet and look around them and look what's behind that argument if you really want to solve it. If you do want to get confused, just listen to the words of the argument and dig into that. So let's jump to the next slide. So that guy is commonly known as the Red Baron, and he was the most successful aviator in World War I, and he simply changed the model. He would literally not engage an enemy if the enemy knew he was there. And by the time you knew he was there, you were in his gun sight. And if at any moment, no matter how good he was as an aviator, if you knew he was there, so like, I'm bugging out, I'm going to go get somebody that I can sneak up on. Very simple model change, but became the most successful aviator on the back of that model. Now, of course, he had fantastic training and skills and fortitude, and was a pretty smart fella. But that is innovating at the model level. Next, if we jump to the next slide, here's some business examples. Rockefeller, who became so rich and so powerful with Standard Oil, we invented monopoly legislation to break up that company. He just used the telegraph and the railroads to reinvent the model of refining oil, and became, the richest guy in America at that point. If we jump to the next slide. Sears, one of the most successful business stories on earth, a complete supply chain play. Once you had telegraph, once you had railroads, they said, hey, you know what? We could not sell things in shops. We could sell things on paper. We'll create this thing called a catalog, and then we'll just ship it to you. Now, unfortunately, Sears is also a great case study on how to blow up a company about 100 years later, or 120. But again, a simple model change where they said, how would we build our business from scratch, our competitive battle using the new technology. We'll blast through a couple more of these on the next slide. So Uber really didn't have any great technology, right? They built some stuff on top of 4G using existing platforms. What they did is they looked at, let's take New York, for example, a very messy market where there's a ton of inventory, very variegated, a ton of consumers, and just a big sea of fog in between. And they said, you know what, we could clear up that fog. We could have much better service, much better ancillary services and billing, and a much better delivery of the product on top of that. And we could do that without actually owning any assets, right? If I'd have talked to you about Uber during the times of 3G, you would have gone, well, that's just bonkers, right? How would that ever happen? And despite not being fantastically good technologists for the first few years, fantastically big success, right? Huge, changed the model for transportation in urban environments. Travel agents. I gave a speech in 2000 to the worldwide giant travel agent conference that happens every year. And I said, look, 2/3 of you are gone in 3 or 4 years. And in super polite Britain, I got booed. And I said, look, no, it's not my fault. Here's what's going to happen with the internet. This model will change, right? Anytime you have a broker or a specialist, and you see this a lot in the military, it's because your process map and your environment is so complicated, you have to bring in a broker to explain it, right? And you see that a lot with supply chain, especially solving supply chain problems. It's an architecture and a design and a model problem that you're solving with brokers. And that used to be the case with travel agents. Now, previously, this was all well and good because there was no place to go and cull this information and process it automatically with computerized intelligence. You needed people to go do that. So let's jump to the next one. So these are 3 areas to watch in their ecosystems. From, remember how I described the fog between inventory and choices for end consumers and the consumers themselves, and the giant amount of fog and the varying ways to get billed and to get supplied and to manage all of that. These three markets are probably the 3 worst in the world from that perspective. If you brought somebody from another planet and you showed them a diagram of how these markets work, they'd go, whoa, did a bunch of drunk children do this? This is just crazy bad. Especially healthcare. Education may be the worst. There's some really good work going on in that. I'll touch on that a little bit. But as you watch these three areas evolve over the next few years, they are analogs for the complexities and the supply chain fog around warfighting. And I think you'll start to see solutions and things appear here that you go, oh wait, if we did that with this, that would work. Now, some of that, of course, is political. We manufacture way too many tanks. That's because there's congressmen that want lots more tanks, not necessarily people in the army. But beyond those problems, you'll see some good analogs. All right, if you jump to the next slide. So I really like these things, IIPs, because I invented them, but also because they're useful. And this is where I take a breath and we see if there are any questions. Just unmute yourself or throw it into chat if you don't want to talk, and I'll try and answer your question.
Hey, Toby, you mentioned the IPA, the leap to IPA.
IPAE, yeah.
That's something that, right now the military, the Air Force is investing heavily in VR, AR. I take it this is the next step beyond that, or are these different things?
Yeah, it is. It's sort of a level above that. I'm a huge fan, a huge fan of AR. I've got an amazing company listed in here later that just does some really clever architectural things with that. But IPAE, so remember, it's Walter Parks and Spielberg, right? And what are they good at? They're good at telling stories that have persistence over time, right? The Men in Black series as one example, or keeping an audience engaged all the way through Master and Commander, or the fantastic movie Gladiator. Marcus Aurelius, in just sidebar, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor that gets killed early in Gladiator, his original name was Verus, which means truth, fair dealing, a bunch of synonyms to that. The name of my advisory business is Verus Advisory, because I'm a big fan of the Stoic philosophers. So think of, it's IPAE because it's immersive, it's participative, which means it's multiple people, right? That feel that they are present and engaged and recognizing each other, and it's audience engagement. The problem with a lot of environments that get created is they're really good simulations, but they haven't built in the fabric that says, okay, I'm going to make sure that I engage Bill because I know Bill and I know where Bill is in this learning curve. And I know how Bill has looked at this from a preference perspective, and I've got a little bit of history on Bill, and across the rest of the unit that you have in there. Plus, it's really sort of high-end quality environment. They've already got a setup on. I know ASU has a setup. Their innovation center is in the Creative Commons with ASU. There's another one at Marine Corps Base Quantico. There's another one at Langley, but yeah, it's a whole different intelligent thing where you learn through designed experience as opposed to I'm in a 3D environment. I built a training class inside Second Life for an insurance company in 2009, and it was super sticky and super useful, but it was still a class, right? It wasn't an audience engagement thing. So yeah, that's what that is. The name of that company is Dreamscape, and it's, I'm a super jaded tech guy. We invested in the Void when it came out. We put money in iWay, and this thing is just mind-blowingly cool.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I can plug you into those guys. They honestly think they're going to redefine education and training. I mean, if you think of SOF and the 6 major principles behind SOF, I mean, one of them is the anchor of preparation is repetition, right? How costly is it for me to mock up an environment and run operators through it repeatedly and repeatedly until, okay, I think we've got it. And then new intel comes in and goes, oh no, that building is actually over there. And that's a 2-story, not a 1-story. If that's all in a virtual world, a whole different kettle of fish. And that applies for anything that requires, that level of precision or has that level of danger in it. All right, so let's keep going because I've got.
Neil had a question.
Yep, I've got a question for you.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Neil.
All right, hello. You mentioned Sears earlier and Uber, and I want you to kind of predict the future. So with Amazon and Uber both not actually creating anything, they just basically use technology and provide a service for customers. How is it that you would think maybe 100 years from now, just like when Sears first started, they were the best thing since bread. So 100 years from now, or maybe about 80 or so years from now, with Uber and Amazon, how do you think they're going to be able to maintain the reputation that they have now, or will they make it?
Yeah, so history shows that the ones that are really great and fantastic die sooner or later, right? If you'd been alive in 1911, at the end of 1911, there's a bunch of articles about, wow, people in the future, it's just so sad because you're never going to see this much change ever again. We've really nailed it. So many things happened that we didn't think would happen. One that'll blow your mind. In 1912, 38% of the cars on the road were electric. 38% of the cars on the road in 1912 were electric. Everybody seems to have forgotten that one. I think two things are going to happen. I think a lot of power goes to the edge, and that's the consumer or the actual downrange warfighter. And there will be intelligent, bespoke, tailored helpers and systems and platforms that really serve your needs. Now, if that's your commercial needs, that's one thing, and you will be the aggregator into services that you plug into. Or if you're a warfighter, it'll be managing the data you need when you need it in a proactive, preventative, pattern matched way. That takes away power from some of these giants. The other thing is that as additive manufacturing really takes off, you're going to see the ability to a lot of additive manufacturing. You don't have a supply chain because you're putting it close to the source, and you're not really paying any royalties to anybody because you've just downloaded, the software to do it almost for free. And I think that takes the power out of some of the scale players. So I think some of the players that have this giant scale advantage will start to go away as others become more focused on the real end user, right? And that systems will start to get assembled and built backwards. The whole mosaic warfare thing that underpins JADC2 is tending that way. But will there always be giant big companies? Sure, absolutely. The other thing that's going to happen to Uber, nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, boy, I hope I have some transportation today, right? A lot of people will find a way to solve the problem that the tool transportation solves in other ways. If that's eliminating demand or proactively serving it. So I think that's also a risk to that. But I do think that's a ways out. And Amazon has the other advantage of they have a generation of technology that sells like hotcakes, but I think it's probably 2 or 3 or 4 years away before you can get the same thing, 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper from somebody else on the cloud side.
Got it.
All right, let's jump ahead to the next slide. I've got 700 more slides. Just kidding. Not that the military ever does a lot of PowerPoint. So let's blast through these two, and I'll try and demystify these. If you jump to the next slide, we'll start with the 5G. So what is it? 5G is really two things. I mean, it's a giant sea of buzzwords and over-promising and hocus pocus, but there's two core things to it. If you jump to the next slide. So it's a quantum leap forward for communicating through the air, right? It's a latency of 5 milliseconds, and latency is a telecom term, which means how quickly I get a response, right? How quickly does my phone ping a phone in LA and I get a ping back, right? That's the round trip is 5 milliseconds. That's crazy fast. Way faster than 4G, and it's fast enough to where you can do things in real time, right? Certain things matter in real time. Getting a little whisper in your ear saying, "Hey, watch out! There's a tug around the corner coming at 15 miles an hour. It's going to run you over." 10 seconds after it ran you over, not super useful, right? All kinds of things with targeting that way. But also things that require motion sensing and spatial sensing to be in sync, right? If you get into VR or AR and those two things are out of sync, you become nauseous, because when you get poisoned, those two faculties get out of sync in your brain. So when your brain gets that artificially from bad AR or VR, where you've got a 40 millisecond or 50 millisecond round trip instead of a much smaller one, your brain says, "Oh, you've been poisoned," and then you throw up. And I'm not the best product development guy on earth, but if one of your features is it makes you throw up, probably not a good product. The speed and the throughput are massively better. This is a 10 to 100x better than 4G, 10 terabytes per square kilometer per second, and a throughput of 10 gigabits per second. Which means you can do giant data uploads. You know, you can drive an Abrams past the scanner and upload all of the onboard diagnostic data as it's driving by you, right? Rather than going parking it overnight and plugging it in. Mobility, I am absolutely certain that we're on the cusp of a gigantic wave of drone technology. And vertical electric jet technology, and this will communicate with things that goes 500 kilometers an hour. That's about 300 miles an hour. The other thing that is going to create sort of a flywheel effect is this thing's designed for IoT. 5G will do 1 million sensors or IoT devices in a square kilometer. Right, that's a shed load of density. Service deployment, because this is a software-defined cloud-native system rather than a bunch of bespoke boxes and wires. You don't have to go set up boxes and plug things in and connect things. This is all containerized software. So deployment goes from, well, when the technician gets to it, to 90 seconds in software. It's very green, both from a money and an environmental perspective. It's 10x more energy efficient. And if you saw the energy bills for running the Verizon network, you'd know that was a gigantic amount of money. Now, that's all cool stuff that the radio does through the air, right? That's just like Ethernet through the air. It's just connectivity. Network connectivity is pipes, which are typically fiber. And then it's stuff through the air. This is through the air bit. Now, the second part is probably the most important and the big aha with 5G. If you jump to the next slide. So, because it's a software-defined cloud-native network, the edge of the network automatically becomes bog standard containerized compute. So now I've got this amazing device in my hand that communicates round trip in 5 milliseconds to a compute edge where I can do AI or cognitive video or all kinds of precision work at the edge inside a 30 millisecond window, including compute time. And look, to put that in perspective, that's 1/10 of a blink of an eye. So I'm now 5G lets me, and this is the important part, lets me have a supercomputer in my back pocket and work in real time. It makes visual intelligence real time. It makes porting massively long-term developed AI out to the edge to work in real time, and that should change everything. Smart people at BCG and Deloitte and Qualcomm have published very detailed papers saying, look, it's $12 trillion worth of impact. Now, is it $12 trillion? Is it 6 trillion? Is it 4? I don't know. But that just shows you the scale. If it's 2 trillion, it's gigantic. So let's jump on to the next slide and keep blasting through it. So these are some of the emerging platforms that are coming out because of those two components of 5G, right? Cognitive intelligent video, if you can see it, you can detect it. Training high density pictures is not hard, whether that's target acquisition or target identification or facial recognition, or even vibration sensors in robots, right? We've looked at that with a big roboticized factory, and it gives you real precision intelligence in real time. So photons become sensors. I don't need a sensor in that thing to know what's going on with that thing, whether that's heat or I can send radio waves through a wall, tell you how many people in a room, tell you what their pulse rate is and what their breathing rate is. So that creates photonic sensorization. Lots of commercial applications for that. If you think about loitering kinetic platforms, it also changes the game with those. Artificial intelligence at the edge. Give me all of the data you've got, and I will dump it into a 3-layer cake at the edge, one that absorbs the data very easily, where you don't need brilliant technologists to dump the data in. The second, that'll run Legoized, pattern matching, random forest, preventative this, proactive this, AI against it. And then the third layer of the cake, which is actually the hard layer, a user interface that a non-technical operator at the edge downrange can use to change their environment to be much more precise and proactive. That thing, I've already seen it. It's been built. There's lots of people working on that, and there's a lot of baloney out there about AI, right? There's really two buckets of AI. There's really, really difficult stuff like beating the Korean Go champion or winning Jeopardy or processing the data out of the fusion reactor at Lawrence Livermore. And then there's the scale of data that a military operation would have in the field, or the scale of data at a Fiat 2 million square foot Fiat Chrysler factory up in Detroit, or the Mayo Clinic out in Arizona. That scale of data comparatively is tiny, and the pattern detection and the proactive this and the preventative that, and it is simple AI. It's not 27 layers of machine learning to detect ways to win, beat a Korean Go champion. So all you really need is that Lego and these platforms to do that. And then on the right, and I apologize for intelligent engagement having a shopping metaphor there, but that's because I have crap PowerPoint skills. But immersive creation and consumption changes everything. The ability to process many dimensions of data when you're in a 3D environment in near real time is surprisingly good. And back to Bill's question earlier, human brains are essentially two things, right? They're pretty good pattern matching boxes, and they're storytelling boxes. So imagine now you're in a story metaphor inside a structure that you're familiar with in multiple dimensions. matching patterns. I think it's going to change, for sure, change education and training. So that's 5G. We're going to jump into the next section where I think the even bigger changes are coming. Just to recap as we jump into the fourth industrial revolution, right? 5G is a big part of that. The big difference between the fourth industrial revolution and the others, and this comes out of all of the wicked smart people at Davos in a 165-page paper, and it's pretty much accepted. There's been some really good work at ASU and Stanford and Oxford on this, and everybody agrees it's going to be the scale of the other revolutions. Those literally changed the world, right? On the back of the Industrial Revolution, the Brits, made enough money and had enough of an economic engine to build what up to that point had been the biggest navy on earth, and then the biggest empire ever known. So these are world-changing paradigms. The big difference with the fourth industrial revolution is it's purely cyber-physical, right? Everything that can be connected will be connected. It's on the back of 4 or 5 technologies and all of their derivatives changing, and I'll show you that in a minute. But here's the real kicker. The fourth industrial revolution is going to take about 6 years. Now, and just like the other ones, right, there'll be winners and there'll be losers. There'll be nations that win and nations that fall behind. There'll be sectors that win and sectors that don't, right? British Steel became dominant back in that era. Standard Oil, we already talked about. Germany and Britain becoming industrial powerhouses. Moldova, not so much, right? So it doesn't mean this is a rising tide that gets everybody up. And hopefully we don't have any Moldovans on the phone that I just insulted. So jump to the next slide.
Hey, Toby, could I just jump in? I have to leave here in a few minutes. First, thanks for putting this on. I've learned a lot and appreciate you educating us and having this discussion. Have you been tracking any of the 5G news lately? Our own Senator Shelby is slipping in or attempting to slip in a $5 billion earmark to improve 5G capacity on military bases. And I'm just wondering if you were tracking any of those kind of news stories and what you thought of that.
Yeah, I stay close to that. I do think there's a groundswell both on the DoD side of the fence and the national competitive side of things. I'm a senior fellow, whatever that means, at the Council on Competitiveness, and there's a groundswell of we have got to put more money into this and we've got to drive it harder and faster, partly because China, the way China works, they just pick a couple of cities with 10 million people and go like, we're going to 5G the snot out of this city, off you go, right? Now, I don't ever want to be in that sort of command and control political structure, but we are going to have to compete against those guys. Mehmet, if you can watch these next 2 slides, these are the 2 most important in the entire deck. Go back to the last one, if you would, the previous one. So look, we all get this, right? We've all watched AI, big data cloud, AR, VR, IoT massively expand over the last 10 years. If you look back and remember 2010 and try to remember one cool AR thing, maybe you can. I gave the cloud lecture, practitioner lecture at Stanford in 2010, not because I was really good at it, it's because I was the only CIO who'd done 5 big implementations. So this is really true. Here's the key to the fourth industrial revolution. It's the next slide. If you just go 5 or 6 years into the future and you look at that curve, that massive growth over the last 10 years looks like the flat part of the curve. I am neck deep on all of these technologies, and from a price, performance, footprint, value, impact, this is the beginning of a giant hockey stick curve for those technologies. Now, just imagine all of those could play together on a software-defined, cloud-native, super low latency, fat bandwidth, designed for IoT, compute at the edge network. Oh man, that would create a really amazing flywheel. Well, that gobbledygook that I just said is 5G. So these things are going to go onto the intelligent network and even put more fuel on that fire. This is literally the technical underpinnings of why the people in Davos say we're about to have a fourth industrial revolution, which means several things. It means you got to stay on top of this technology. You can't show up with muskets to fight the dicey needle gun. You've got to arm yourself with the new weapons, and you've got to change your talent to task and your mission to command and control to be in this new environment. But that is the key story. And I'll give you a couple of examples of companies in these spaces that they're just doing quantum leaps ahead. But that is really happening. It's happening now, and it's going to be leave a lot of wreckage over the next 4 to 5 years. So if we jump on to the next slide. So what is what does that mean? So what, who cares? So what all of those technologies together in a real-time battle space or in a real-time commercial environment does what I call these 8 Ps that you have on the screen, right? Things become proactive, predictive, pattern match, preventative, permissioned, process performant, which is just a fancy P word for alliteration, meaning really good at process, peer connected, and precise. So which side of the battle do you want to be on? The military that's the 8 Ps or the old one? Which healthcare center do you want to go visit when you get sick? The 8 Ps or the other one? And here's the other sort of a trick on this. If you manage those 8 Ps and you drive those technologies to drive this, you're also the low-cost operator because you have less defects and you have less problematic things in your entire process chain and your extended supply chain and your ecosystem. And because this thing is digital and it listens to data, it's the nature of instrumented process and AI, it becomes more and more intelligent because you're building this intelligence behind it, right? The fifth time Neil is inside an IPAE environment, it is much more engaging and intelligent and proactive with him because it's been watching Neil for 5 engagements, right? So you get this increased intelligence and increased agility. And look, agility really matters, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. A footnote on there, 2 professors helped me with 2 of those Ps, so I have to give them credit. Good buddies of mine. If we jump to the next slide. So if you think about those 8 Ps, they should all underpin things. They should be architectural guideposts and guardrails for everything from JADC2 to Mosaic warfare to warfighting infrastructure, certainly to your warfighting cost infrastructure, which if you care about competitiveness, you have to start caring more about that. Supply chain effectiveness. I think we've seen some recent examples where that's been really problematic. That changes architectural leadership imperatives. It requires new skills. It requires a primacy of information architects. I was talking to a couple of colonels on a big base in Georgia, and I said, well, who are your information architects on this? And they said, well, we're going to have to go figure that out, right? They shouldn't feel like Lone Rangers. Most companies are in the same boat. Also, in this kind of a Legoized, fast-changing tech world, there's no way you can do all this stuff yourself. You've got to get good at ecosystem management and the speed of managing that. And then if you don't have innovation radar, you should. And it's basically having effective listening posts and dropping innovations into 4 buckets, right? Seen it, interesting, not for us, don't care, right? Next generation nail gun probably doesn't matter unless you're in the construction business. Seen it, interesting, we should come back and revisit this at some point in the future. We've put a pin on this one, we're watching it. Oh, interesting, might actually be useful and impactful now. Get it into a lab environment, start playing with it, determine whether this is a dicey needle gun or is it just another fancier musket. And then there's ones that you immediately go, oh my goodness, this is something we need to adopt. We should do this right now. And look, on the time to do this, I was very honored a decade or more ago to teach a class on culture of innovation at SOCOM, and I asked the admiral who asked me to do this. I go, look, you guys are the most innovative fighting force on earth. Why on earth do you need a class on innovation culture? And he said one very brilliant thing that made me feel stupid. It was, well, the enemy, they're becoming more innovative, right? So when you're at your top of your game is probably another time to double down on this, let alone for the fact that all of this stuff is changing so fast, and an innovation will sneak up on you if you don't have the right listening posts and radar and the 4 buckets and the processes to go with that. Jumping on to the next slide. These are just some examples and pictures of areas where 5G is already having an impact. And remember, it's that compute at the edge and that really fat bandwidth with low latency that makes the difference. You can look at these later and dig into these and shoot me questions if you've got those. But I think all of these are relevant across many, many different domains. Jumping on to the next slide. Another one of my IIPs that I like so much because, well, I invented it. Questions, comments, concerns, arguments? All right, let's keep going. We've got another 12 minutes. Is that right? Yeah, another 12 minutes till we're done. So here are some of the emerging imperatives. If we flip to the flip to the next sign. So ecosystem thinking will matter more, right? Because you will be, remember, things moving into a service. You're not buying big things anymore. You're buying services, even if you have them inside your own environment, they'll be managed as services. So you've got to get good at managing ecosystems. And one of the things, maybe the primary skill, is to be a really good partner, to be the partner of choice, to be the partner when XYZ company or division are back at base talking about you, going, yeah, those guys are awesome to do business with, right? That's alien behavior for most companies. It's certainly alien behavior for DoD, right? Who's the general in charge of let's be a great partner? There isn't one. But don't feel like they're on Lone Ranger. Most people do suck at that. We reorganized two and a half years ago. We reorganized the entire company at Verizon around the anchor thought of how important this is in the future. So we would not only be easier to do business with, so we could manage and play in this ecosystem. We put the top 30,000 people through training, and the capstone of the training is 8 little vignettes from people outside of Verizon going, look, being a good partner, you don't get to grade your own homework. Let me tell you what a good partner is from my perspective. And that's the top 30,000 people we put through that. This will create different industrial structures. They'll look more like Zaibatsu's than anything else. And you can Google that and look it up, but it was basically how a lot of Japanese conglomerates worked. They actually created ownership structures and partnerships around ecosystems back in the 50s. I had a factory down in Chihuahua, Mexico on Christmas Eve when I was at Motorola and had some responsibility for supply chain. And that would kill fourth quarter for our biggest business unit. It would kill the annual numbers because in that world, in consumer electronics, if you ship it and get it on somebody's loading dock before the end of the year, you can book the revenue. So those last, even though no one's shopping, getting those orders and landing them on somebody's loading dock is super important. This huge factory is down. And it's one of 14 things, right? It's either database or the application. I'm pretty sure it's not the middleware, which is what WebMethods is, but the middleware guys were geniuses. Or it could have been the hardware, it could have been the network, or it could have been some operator error, but the factory's down, right? And I end up looking for Fred at WebMethods because I need his help because he's the genius on how everything connects together and how does this work. And we'd gone out of our way to be a great partner to WebMethods, right? It was my mission to treat them as strategically important. And I can't find him. So on Christmas Eve, I called the CEO of WebMethods and I said, look, I really need Fred. He's awesome. and I'm trying to get him. I can't get a phone. Oh, you can't get him on the phone because he's on a plane. Oh, where's he going? Chihuahua, Mexico. They just put him on a plane and sent him down there when they heard about it. It wasn't his stuff that was broke, but he fixed it, saved an entire fiscal year for Web Methods. I already talked about the Verizon example. And to make this hard, being a good partner and strategic partner, you have to be flexible and agile because the members of the ecosystem are going to change over time. The other thing is break your ecosystem partners into what's really strategically important and what's a commodity, right? The people that sell carpet to the DoD, who cares? You don't need a relationship with those guys. You can shoot one carpet vendor and get another one next week. Same with furniture. Nobody cares. There are other things that are a lot more important in your supply chain. You need those relationships in those areas, and that's where you spend your time and put your own personal capital on the line. Again, from a command and control, what do people get rewarded for? How do you match talent to task as mission changes because this environment changes? That's a really big part of the future of DoD, and it's something that I think is a little bit missing in JADC2 so far. If you jump to the next slide. So here's some tech to watch. I pulled some examples. And these are companies that I know personally and I can vouch for, but are examples in different spaces. We talked about Dreamscape and Walter Parks and Spielberg building that crazy cool environment. In-Q-Tel is invested in that. ASU is going whole hog on it. Verizon, we invested. I think that's just going to redefine that space. There'll be other players, but I think that's going to be sort of the gold standard. CrowdSmart is a thing that when I first saw it, I went, well, this is just PowerPoint. There's no way this really works. But this is actually ping 30 people with a set of constructed questions and interactions around, should I pick company A, B, or C for my next investment in my venture portfolio, or what's the feature set for a genomics workbench at IBM, or complex decision analysis. And it actually debiases, takes out the noise, and finds the intelligence in those conversations that you wouldn't get because you can't have conversations with 40 people coherently around the same thing. And it also prompts you for questions in areas that you might not have thought to look at, which is one of the big things in AI that people don't realize. AI gives you nice answers and predictions and patterns, but AI periodically does things where you go, ooh, what's that? We should go look at that. That's something we hadn't thought of. I sat in a room with can't tell you which car manufacturer, but the head of product and the head of marketing. And after 2 hours of watching massive data on a massive screen, the head of product swore out loud and went, oh my God, I've been designing cars for market segments that don't exist. 2 minutes later, the head of marketing went, uh-oh, I've been marketing to market segments that don't exist, right? So those sort of negative questions popping out of that environment helps. Ocean's out of Chicago. They already have a big data platform that's 10x faster and 7 times cheaper than the market leader at exabyte scale, right? That changes how much data you can keep. It changes what data propositions are viable. It changes cost structures. The National Crime Bureau in UK that does really massively complex crime analysis across huge data sets, they went from 3 days for an answer to a query for 3 minutes. That's that hockey stick curve I talked to you about on the key slides that I showed those 2 graphs. 5G cognitive video and AI at the edge. There's 50 companies out there doing cool stuff on that. I think even Gartner is tracking that now. You want to see a really cleverly architected AR platform. I sat in a room and did a spec review of a cell tower with 4 other people who are all in different locations, and we're looking at the top of the cell tower like it's right there in front of me at scale, and I could zoom in on it because they'd flown a drone around it and fed me that data, right? And I'm here in Jersey. Another guy was in I think in Düsseldorf, somebody was out on the West Coast. But that sort of capability and the ability to annotate it and keep it and grow it is amazing. And then, uncrackable, unhackable security. Quantum computers are going to take a while to really have an impact, and quantum computing really only applies to certain areas and certain types of problems. There are some problems that it's not useful for. But hacking giant prime multiple keys with that are not hackable by the entire compute platform on Earth today will be hackable with quantum computing. That will happen in the next 5 years, unless, of course, you've got quantum keys protecting that, which under some of the laws of quantum physics, if you tamper with a thing, it changes, right? Observation changes elements in quantum space. So the moment you start to try and observe it and hack it, it stops. Plus, it's not a mathematical formula. It's just a gigantic super random key. So those are just examples of mind-blowing stuff. 2 of those, when they first sent me PowerPoints, I went, there's no way this is real. These guys have got slideware, right? And I'm, neck deep on a lot of this stuff, so it's that advanced. Let's keep going. We've got a couple more slides to go, and I have one backup slide if we don't have questions. So look, agility at scale really matters, right? Small agile kills big slow. There's a fantastic book by Max Boot. I'm trying to see it over there on my bookshelf about the small hidden wars. It's a historical walkthrough of special forces successes showing David whacking Goliath, right? Now imagine Goliath is as skilled as David and more agile. I don't care how many Davids you throw at Goliath, they're not going to win, right? Every job I've ever landed was me showing a slide of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston, knocked him out in 1 minute and 28 seconds in the first round. And I said, look, big agile kills small slow. We know that. Agile beats slow, but big agile kills everything. Here's how we take your company to become big and agile. And that's how I landed big technology transformation jobs. But agile at scale is not just about lots of agile teams and agile methodologies. It's about the whole strategy to mission to command to control to talent to task set of processes. And it's important because everything is accelerating, right? If I'd have told you 3 years ago you could 3D print a rocket, Hezbollah could 3D print a rocket in Gaza, you go, yeah, you're bonkers, right? That'll never happen. Or that the Chechens would put tank mines on drones and just have them sit out there waiting for audio signatures of tanks. You go, well, that's not a thing, right? So this is just, and those are some things in the bottom of that slide that talk about that that sort of environment that's coming. Jumping to the next slide. So here's some of the other things you have to think through if you're going to do this, right? You have to be able to migrate your talent to where the need is, right? Which makes you think about talent differently. AI is going to infuse everything. The 8 Ps, especially those ones that are listed there, as intelligence becomes pervasive. And again, intelligence isn't just giving you answers, it's making you think about things in different ways and maybe showing you opportunities or gaps that you didn't know. It'll also make you think about ecosystems and value chain mapping for resilience and optimization differently. There's a little company I talked to yesterday that I'd never heard of called Interos that's now worth $1 billion. That's all they do for companies. contingency planning, not as an exercise, which we do a lot of today, but as an integral part of the plan, right? I've got to be out of this base by this date because I'm pulling my troops out of there. The window of stability for me to do that could be 60 days, it could be 6 months, it could be 30 days, it could be a week. Real contingency planning means you stage all the resources for all one of those. You don't throw it up and vote and say, okay, let's go with 60 days, right? And that's changing contingency planning to be an integral part of real plans and resource allocation. The other thing that I think business does a very bad job of, and DoD over the last 10, 15 years, much better job of, but still a ways to go, is the real risk tolerance for making innovation bets, right? And you're going to make bets, and the problem with bets is they're probability based, and some of them aren't going to work, right? And the ability to actually harvest value from failure and to truly manage that positively is really difficult, right? There's a little typo there. It says most companies are really awful at that. And the easy check is, all right, show me the intelligence you harvested from the last thing you did that failed miserably from an innovation bet, and show me that you shut it down in a really worthwhile time cycle, and show me that you rewarded the people for doing that, right? There's a little book published on strategic latency out of the Center for Global Security Research. Zach Davis is one of the editors. Leo Blanken is also one of the editors. I've got a chapter in there that goes into that in great detail on how you go through that. That was a team at Lawrence Livermore for a couple of years working on S&T stuff for SecDef. The other thing is change management mastery, right? I got to teach that course on culture of innovation down at SOCOM for a very short amount of time before the sequester hit. But my point to them is, look, I'll teach that course if you let me teach change management. There's only 4 models for all change management on Earth. One of them works 50% better than the number 2 one. Managing that intentionally and making sure you're communicating your change management models will really matter over the next few years because of how change intensive this is. I've seen great strategy, great talent line up with just the wrong approach to change. I know a giant trillion-dollar financial company that likes to run themselves like a family. It's largely family owned, and they want consensus and participation on everything. And they move so slowly, it's just a matter of time before they're dead. Let's jump on to the very last slide. Keep going, and we'll stop on the Dickens one. I had a backup slide if we were running fast to explain why modern tech is like rugby or a commercial kitchen, but I'll leave that story for another time. I just love this quote, right? Everybody's heard this from Dickens, the first part. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? It's the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities. I think the whole thing is really important, right? It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness, spring of hope, and the winter of despair. Again, as we go through these changes, there'll be people on the negative side of this and people on the positive side, and that's not random. It's about how you approach it and what you do. And the last 3 industrial revolutions are proof positive of that. So I think we're 5 minutes over. We covered a lot of territory. I'll turn it back over to you.
Toby, thank you so much for that. I learned a lot. I'm actually going to make sure I share this with our team because there's a lot of information that we can glean as we work closely with Air University. Thank you so much for your time, Toby. Thank you all for attending. We don't have time for questions, but again, thank you. This is a series, so please stay connected to MGMWorks and AUIX as we share more conversations in the future. Thank you all for
my email's on the next slide. If anybody wants to ping me and goes, hey, what the heck did that mean, or that, totally happy to do that. And And the little secret is if you send me an email and you don't get an answer, shoot me a text and say, hey, knucklehead, there's an email you missed in your email in basket. And that's the back door to getting your emails nudged up, because occasionally I get swamped with emails and I might miss one.
Awesome. And hopefully you all see that on the slide and get that information. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you on the next work series conversation. Y'all have a good day.
Thanks, Toby. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Cheers.
Thank you.